Aloha and welcome to Your Heart Magic, an illuminating space where psychology, spirituality and heart wisdom meet. Here's your host, Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, the clinical psychologist with a mystic mind.
Aloha, everyone. This is Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. Welcome to Your Heart Magic. This week, we are talking about the topic, why can't we be mystic-minded? And I'm so excited to dive into this. We will be looking a little bit at what is a mystic and what does it actually mean to be mystic-minded. And I'll be sharing some of my own experiences around that and my own understanding of those things. We will also be looking at how do we develop the mystic mind and some things that might stop us or block us from being open to that kind of knowledge or information. So with that, let's dive in. Before we get going on what is a mystic, I want to start with the title of this podcast. Why can't we be mystic-minded? This is a question that I am sure I'm not the first person who's asked, but it is something that I have said multiple times at different points in my journey. And it arose from this place inside of me where I was beginning to have these very spiritual experiences, and I was developing my own understanding of what those things meant to me and what I believed about the mysteries and the world around me. And I started to run into these walls within myself, and these walls were sort of the institution of clinical psychology and these preconceived notions that I had about how my field might respond to some of my particular topics of interest. And I remember one day just kind of throwing my hands up when I was talking to a friend who is very spiritual, and I was kind of sharing my personal dilemma with her. And I said, why can't we be mystic-minded? And she was like, yes, exactly. Why can't we be mystic-minded? And it kind of caught with me. And I ended up putting it down on a poster and printed it off and put it on my wall. And it's something that I actually believe is an important question, because I think there is a legacy of shame that is associated with being a mystic. I don't know that that's actually a very conscious thing, but I do think that there is a lot of embarrassment that can come from it, a lot of fear that can come from it, and a history of not exactly knowing what to do with the kinds of people who might be having those experiences. We don't know how to think about it. So I think there can be a lot of feelings that come up when we even think about the terminology mystic. There was a reason that I threw my hands in the air and I said, why can't we be mystic-minded? So today we are going to explore that question and shift from a space of, we'll say, shaming to claiming, and learning to be more comfortable and embrace the mystic-minded self. If you look in the dictionary, the definition of a mystic is a person who claims to attain or believes in the possibility of attaining insight into mysteries transcending ordinary experience and ordinary human knowledge, as by direct communication with the divine or immediate intuition in a state of spiritual ecstasy. A mystic is basically somebody who is really wanting to seek the heart of the divine mysteries and is experiencing their understanding of that through some form of direct revelation or intuitive knowledge. A mystic is somebody who experiences the divine in ways that might come through with visions or a sense of having some form of a communication or some form of a very powerful, transcendent experience. And historically, if you dive into the history of mysticism, the study of mystics, which is really fascinating and not something we're jumping into today that's too thick and too rich and too much. But if you really look at mystics throughout history, you'll see that they come from all walks of life and all faith traditions and many different belief and philosophy systems. It's not just limited to, one or the other. There are many faces of the divine and many mystics who have had these kinds of encounters. And when we hear the word mystic in this day and age, you might just ask yourself, what comes up for you when you hear that word? When you think about being a mystic, what comes through and what are your perceptions around that? And my sense of things is that historically we have either revered somebody who has those experiences and looked up to them or thought of them as some form of a guru or a teacher or somebody who was in relationship with the divine and bringing this information through to help others obtain that knowledge or enlightenment or something like that. Or I think we have probably mocked them or shamed them or put terminology on these really beautiful magical experiences that made them somehow seem dark or ugly, or perhaps they were disbelieved or scapegoated somehow. So there has been this interesting back and forth where mystics have either been revered and elevated or kind of at the bottom of the trash heap, and kind of ridiculed or mocked, or their sanity is questioned. And when I talk about a legacy of shame, and we think about how do we understand these gifts may be unfolding in our modern day age and tapping into this wisdom, I think that unless you are extremely fortunate to be surrounded by a community of very supportive people who believe in those kinds of things, that many individuals have to unpack a lot of fears and preconceived notions and messages or values that might have been given to them and learned from childhood on about intuition and mystical experiences. Right now, when I think about, I sat down and I drew out a spectrum for fun on kind of people's understanding of mystical experiences and where they're at. And I had on one end those who might be totally closed off to it. It's crazy. People are making stuff up. They're being delusional. A lot of judgment there. And those are people who aren't necessarily interested in pursuing things. There's other life paths for them. This one might not be it, and then I kind of had this other end of the spectrum where somebody is very in touch with their intuitive gifts and they're very spiritual and they have found a way to work that into their life. Maybe they even teach it, or they run a shop, or they are somehow in that community. And so they're a voice or a spokesperson for these very spiritual concepts and metaphysical concepts. And they're out and they're proud, and they have kind of been through that process of finding their courage to step into the light as their full self. And I think there's a lot of people who likely fall somewhere in the middle of that continuum where they are not closed off, they are open. They might even say, like, I know there's mysteries out there. I know that there are these things that are bigger and more than the eye can see, but they might not be in a position or in a space where they have opened their shop with crystals everywhere. And they're very comfortable saying, I'm this mystical being and I'm very mystic minded and this is my metaphysical shop. There might be a lot of fear there for some people. And I want to address some of the things that sometimes hold people back from embracing the idea of the mystic mind and the idea of mysticism. And some of those things have to do with fears that we have about how others might see us, how they might judge us, and how they might perceive us if they were to know that we were into these things, and that if they were to know that we had this interest in these areas that sometimes get really relegated in a negative way as woo, and aren't taken particularly serious by some. So I think a lot of times fear holds us back, and there's fear about, is it okay to explore these things? Is it okay to open to this side of myself? Is it okay to listen to X podcast, to read this book, to be into this? And when we might begin to have experiences that are more intuitively based, psychically based, where we might be sensing or perceiving things around us that we can feel or vision somehow, or have a sensory experience of, but we can't necessarily see them, we have a tendency to question our own experience. Is this happening? Is this real? Am I going crazy? I don't love that word, but people kind of use that as this colloquial term to, sort of conceptualize that they feel like they're somehow losing their mind. And I have heard people say this to me sometimes throughout the years, and kind of, I'm having these experiences going on, and I'm worrying that I might be crazy, or I'm losing my mind, or I'm losing my grip on reality. So there's some real fear there. And again, when I talk about the legacy of shame, I think fear can be part of that shame, and fear of, am I a grounded individual, and am I experiencing these things clearly? And if I am, what does that mean? What does that mean for who I am and my understanding of the world? And what do I do with that information? And where do I go with that information? And if we choose to shut it down and say the answer to that question is no, there must be something wrong with me, I'm going to close myself off to these experiences, then what might we do with that information? And how might we judge it or shame it? So there's a lot of questions that often come up for people in this. And it's interesting to me how many people throughout the years, when they find out either one, that I'm a psychologist, but I'm really open to spirituality, or two, maybe they've come to me, or they know me, or get to know me in a much more spiritual way, and aren't particularly concerned with what I do professionally. But what's interesting to me is how many people will kind of confess in a way and say, well, I've been having these experiences, but I wonder, are they real? What am I meant to do with this? And again, that expression of, is my grip on sanity here? So there's just a lot that can come up for people around this. Having a mystic mind is not necessarily the same thing as being a mystic. When I think about a mystic experience, I think about the experience that's in the definition of having some sort of direct experience where it feels like divine revelation, or feels like you're having a very heightened awareness or spiritual experience. There are those who have mystic gifts, who really have these remarkable visions, and things that they might see with their own two eyes, where they will actually have a vision in the waking world, and see something with their eyes, kind of this other reality transposed on this reality, where they are led into some other kind of a vision. So mystics traditionally have some form of mystical visioning, or again, some form of a divine revelation, perhaps channeling might be another word for that. But when I think about having the mystic mind, what I think about is the idea of being open to the question that mysticism kind of seeks to answer, and the terminology mystic seeks to answer. And that question is really about seeking the mysteries and seeking direct experience and direct knowledge with the mysteries. When I think about the idea of being a mystic-minded individual, what comes through is not that you need a gift to do that. It is more of a mindset and being open to receiving information from many different philosophies or other spiritual experiences that you might say, I'm really drawn to the study of astrology. And I think it's really fascinating. And it's being open to learning about some of those more metaphysical concepts. It is being open to the idea of intuitive gifts and how intuition or psychic minded gifts might present themselves. It is being open if you run across somebody who says, I'm having these mystical visions, and maybe they're teaching it, here's what they are. It's being open to that information. And it's cultivating a mindset of considering the possibility of, well, what if these things are true? And without necessarily answering that question, discernment is a big part of this, but it's just being open to those experiences. It's being open to the possibility that there are so much more out there, and that perhaps that so much more can be directly perceived and experienced by us. So having a mystic mind is really about being willing to look at the world with this very curious gaze. And with that curious gaze, ask questions and say, if I step through this gateway here, if I study this, if I learn about this, might this be a stepping stone that helps create opportunity for me to learn more about the divine, for me to learn more about my understanding of the mysteries and my understanding of what those things are. And when I say it's a mindset, that is my sense of it based on my own experience. Because part of what I was running into and started happening to me after my spiritual awakening in 2011, I've talked about that some on the show, is that I did begin to have these very intuitive, spiritual oriented experiences. And for me, it really comes through more in my mind's eye and often seeing visions in my mind more so than in the external world. It's not so much seeing another reality superimposed on this one, but it's more a sense of having these visions that will come through in my mind. And that started for me in about 2011, where I was seeing things around me, seeing things for people, receiving what at the time I just thought of as pictures. Oh, I get these pictures that kind of give me information. Some people might call that the gift of clairvision or clairvoyance or something like that. I'm not super concerned with dividing all of it up and labeling it. But they felt quite mystical at the time. And there was a sense of seeing things that might happen or seeing possibilities that might happen or obtaining information about somebody or something. And some of that had to do with my own relationship with the divine and the relationship with the mysteries and starting to kind of see and feel things in this very transcendent way about the world around me, and this recognition of how much like fierce, divine, unconditional love is blanketing over everything, even when we might not feel like it. So as I was beginning to have those experiences, of course, I wanted to open to it. I was in a very open space at my life at that time. Even though I had my private practice and I was doing my work, and my career was kind of grounded in that sense, I was a seeker, and I began to study all this information. And if I was in a used bookstore, I'd, find myself in the metaphysical book section and kind of grab things that looked of interest to me. And I was open to reading many different things and other people's experiences. And that began to open my mind further. And at the time, I used to think of myself as a student of just understanding what all is out there and what different philosophies are, and learning as much as I could. And what I was doing was expanding my mind without necessarily knowing that I was doing that. I don't think I started out to say, I want to expand my mind and study all this stuff. I think it's more that I was interested in it and I was drawn to it. And I had the space to read through books and learn the tarot and began to understand the history of archetypes and symbols. And those things were very interesting to me. And so I was kind of expanding my idea and the possibility of how information shows up and how the mysteries and the divine and spirit might speak to us. And through the course of my own development, some of what I began to find is that some of those visions grew. I had some pretty big things that happened around the time of 2015 into 2016. And after I had lost my brother Brent in 2016, I had a very strong sense of his presence with lots of signs and symbols and synchronicities and feeling when he might be really close by and having things come through. I began to really go from receiving Akashic readings at that time to becoming a reader of the Akashic Records, at least with my own. And that is a whole other story. But I was having this slow build of these experiences. And when I moved to Kauai in 2017, I knew that I had this intuitive, mystic minded part of myself that was kind of dying to come out and develop her gifts a little bit more and have more experiences than what I was able to have prior to that in my life. And that was a big part of what I did over here on the island the first few years. In addition to any other external work, it was to have these more internal spiritual experiences of growing my spirituality, growing my gifts, and growing my relationship with the mysteries and my relationship with spirit. So asking the question, why can't we be mystic minded? And saying it in a way that was empowering and saying it in a way that I was like, yeah, like, why can't we do this? Was really what gave me permission to fully develop the gifts of being an Akashic reader and working with the records and having a sense of the angels and really feeling archangels and having those direct experiences. It all came from asking that question and from giving myself permission to explore that question. And something that really helped me along the way was realizing that just because I was asking the question and exploring things didn't mean that I had to be right. It didn't mean that I had to be an expert on the subject. It didn't mean that I had to be the only person having these experiences. There's many, many people having these kinds of mystic minded experiences out there. It just meant that I was having my own experience with these kinds of things. And I was learning what that experience meant to me and learning to interpret it as I go. So when we talk about things that might block us from these experiences, that is usually the number one thing. Actually, there's two big things that I can think of. One of them is trying to interpret them too soon. And so many times we shut ourselves down or we feel like we need to see the bigger picture or have a bigger interpretation. And we get really caught up on what does this mean? What does this mean? I've been seeing 333s or 444s everywhere. What does this mean? And certainly it's useful to study what are angel numbers and what might those numbers mean and how might that apply to you in a personal way. But I became more interested in realizing that there's these patterns that were consistently presenting themselves to me. And that if I was seeing 222s consistently, not only did I want to understand what 222 meant and how that might be showing up in my life, but it was almost noting the fact that, okay, this is how like the divine is speaking through me. It's through 222s. It's through numbers. And I would write it down in my journal. That was kind of like my book of my intuitive, spiritual, mystical vocabulary. One of the ways that I understand the mysteries is through numbers. And then, of course, if you decide to study that, you can really deep dive. And there's some really interesting things out there on angel numbers and the vibrations of certain numbers. I'm smiling. You can't see my clock right now. It's 444 on the dot as I'm recording this. I feel like the angels are having a laugh with us. But going back to my experience, it was figuring out ways that I was being spoken to so that I could begin to pay attention. And numbers are a good one because they're easy. We're surrounded by them, and there's something that kind of catches our attention. So part of developing a mystic mind is not necessarily having to interpret it and make it mean this one concrete thing. I don't think that I saw 444 right now because there's this one specific concrete message for BethAnne that I'm supposed to really dig into and think, what do the angels want me to know at 444? I think it's popping up, like I said, as a little laugh for all of us from spirit to say, yeah, we're speaking to you like this. It's okay to pay attention and it's okay to be open to it. And you don't always have to make it mean some big, amazing, huge thing. Sometimes we can just take it in as information and be like, that's awesome. I feel like I'm getting like these little signs and signals, and I feel really seen right now. And I feel really loved right now. And I feel like there's presence with me. And I'm just going to keep paying attention and trying to see what patterns are showing up in my life and trying to understand what might these patterns mean as time goes on, and suspend interpretation and just stay in a space of being open. The other thing that often gets in our way of developing the mystic mind is we expect information to look a certain way. And we expect it to come through in a way. And what if it presents as something else? And years ago, when I was still receiving Akashic readings, and I was really more in the first 3-4 years of my spiritual growth, part of what I remember being working with a woman who was doing readings for me and asking, like, how do I grow my spiritual gifts? How do I grow my spiritual gifts? You know, I was this like really eager student, right? I know there's more out there. I want to access it. How do I grow them? And it was really frustrating to be told, well, these things can't really be forced. But something that kept coming through was that in some ways it was almost like the monkey on my back, that my gifts were growing and I couldn't see it because they weren't coming through in a way that I understood. And I'll never forget this phrase. It was, you keep trying to see spirit through a keyhole. And it was this idea that I had this very limited idea of maybe how mystical experiences happened. And since they weren't happening that way, I didn't think that I was having them. And I remember vividly thinking, like, I don't know, maybe an angel will descend and I'll see it with my own 2 eyes and see this like bright shining light, like something very biblical story like that you would read. And it will say to me, you know, BethAnne, move to Kauai and write the book or something really amazing like that. And that's actually really not how it happened at all. A friend of mine who's also been a really good peer and mentor is somebody who has seen angels from birth on. There are others who've had those experiences. I've not personally had that experience, but after I moved to Kauai, within about 3 to 4 months, I started to feel them. And that's a whole other story, I think, that we'll save for maybe a angel topic someday. But I really felt tapping on my shoulders. I felt feathers at my back. I heard bells in my mind. I had a sense of sort of crystal tingling and ringing and this really joyful, effervescent presence. I wasn't freaked out. I was like, what is this? What am I feeling? What's going on here? But I felt it and I sensed it, as opposed to having a visual experience of seeing it. So that was a gift that grew for me. It wasn't something that an angel descended and I'd never seen one before and I was so afraid. And like, that's not how it happened. So sometimes we have this very narrow vision of how it's going to come through. And that actually keeps us from being open to how things are coming through. So with that, how do we develop our mystic mind? If we're going to give ourselves permission and say, I want to be more mystic minded, I can be a grounded, practical person who is having all these amazing interests. Some of them might be very professional. Some of them might be career related. Some of them might be very just grounded and fun. And I can also be having mystical experiences. It's not one or the other. I can lose the label of what somebody who is mystic minded looks like. And let's just say, what if what mystic minded looks like is the face that you see in the mirror every day? What if that is a beautiful reflection of the mystic mind and your job is to grow into that? then we can be open and we can start to see ourselves as these intuitive beings who have the ability to grow our mystic mind. So how do we do that? I wrote down a few points just to kind of ground this idea. The first one is being open and curious and being willing to learn about different things that speak to you or that resonate with you. I think one of the best things that we can do is seek out knowledge that lights us up and that really calls to us. I think that if something doesn't call to us or it feels off or wrong, then just my personal opinion, best to avoid that. It's probably not for you. But for the things that we feel interested in, or the things that we might say, I don't know if I believe this or not, but I'm really fascinated by the work of this person and what they're sharing. Why not learn about it? And instead of having to make a firm decision that somehow you believe it, you don't, why not just be open to the possibility that there is some sort of light or insight or information for you there? I think about this as taking a survey course of what's out there. And often in college or freshman year, if you take some sort of a survey course in college, maybe you take a survey course in literature, some sort of historical literature or something like that. It doesn't mean you love all of it. There's a lot of books they make you read that you might not like at all. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you yourself would keep reading that genre, but you might discover something that you never knew was completely delightful. Maybe you read Shakespeare in high school or college, or you're introduced to it and you think, I love the stories here. I wouldn't have guessed that I would be so drawn to this. This is how we learn what lights us up. It's just being open to surveying what's out there. So sometimes there's value to follow somebody or look at their Instagram page or listen to their podcast or read the book and say, what does this person possibly have to teach me? And what do I think about this? And just take it in as information with curiosity and openness. And again, a survey course of what is out there. The next thing that I think we can do to develop our mystic mind is to create opportunities to encounter the mystical and to encounter the mysteries. If it makes you feel better to swap out mystical for mysteries or the numinous or intuition or something like that, then use the language that best speaks to you and that best serves you. But often, if we're not creating space to invite it in, then unless we are somebody who uniquely has a gift where from early on, we, see visions or have these experiences. Many times those might not present themselves to us because we're not paying attention. We're closed. Our gaze is closed. So when we create an opportunity to encounter the mysteries and we do something like we go to a sound bath healing, or we go to a woman's circle or a moon circle, some sort of spiritual group or retreat that speaks to us. When we sit down with our journal and a deck of archetype cards, or maybe sit down for a meditation practice, and our goal is to connect with our higher self or a more transcendent sense of self or a transcendent sense of what might be out there, we're creating opportunity for something to happen. And one of the most valuable things that I did when I moved to Kauai is I began creating opportunities to grow my spiritual practices and grow my understanding. And a lot of that happened just in my journal and in my archetype, tarot, oracle card practice. And a lot of it happened with just writing down my thoughts, writing down synchronicities. And I began noticing patterns over time. And I began to notice I would pull certain cards over and over again. So that got me curious about what do those cards mean? when I began to have a sense of angelic presence, and I didn't know what that was at first, I got real curious and I began to make notes in my journal about how those things were showing up to me. And if I felt like I got a message, like if there was a song on the radio and I kept hearing a lyric over and over in my mind, or I, had a flash in my head, maybe after I sort of felt this very light presence, and I had a thought that came through and I thought, wow, feels really inspired. Where did that come from? I wrote those things down in my journal. And over time, I began to develop a practice that those were my journal time is when I was doing like spiritual inventory and I was working on my inner self and I was opening to my relationship with spirit. And it was in that space over time that I began to receive more divine messages and really began to have a sense of more what I would call direct communication with the angels and with a sense of perhaps divine beings, if we want to call it that, or light beings. A more cosmic force is really how it felt. And I did a lot of channeled writing during that time. And it really came from that place of carving out time. And it did not start out that way. That practice began for me, really in 2017. I definitely kept journals and did the tarot stuff and all that prior to that, but I had a little bit more space to create opportunities at that time. And I had more consistency. And in that consistent space is when those things began to come through after about a year and a half. Some of it was coming through even sooner, but it was really creating a pattern, creating an opportunity, and kind of me putting my radar out to spirit, being like, here I am, I'm paying attention, and really putting an intention of love around this space and saying, I am only interested in receiving from, any being that is connected to light and connected to, the Christ consciousness. I just wasn't interested in anything else. I'm here for love. I'm here to teach about love. I know what my purpose is. I'm not interested in working with anything that's not furthering that message. So something else that we can do is ask for what you want and stay open to how it shows up. So try asking in your prayer time, if you have a relationship with the angels or you have your own sense of praying to spirit, whatever your relationship is, put it out there. I would like to experience more mystical experiences. I would like to have more of a direct sense of my intuitive gifts. I would like to feel like I am kind of having some growth in my mystic mindedness and having a sense of seeing some really juicy, amazing things happen with that. Ask and then see how that might show up for you. If we don't put it out there that we're open to it, how is it going to present itself to us? So sometimes, when I am working with the Akashic Records for somebody, and that's our topic for next week. So if you don't know what those are, stay tuned. I will begin with the prayer to access their Akashic Records. But part of what I'm doing too is just saying, hey, Akashic Records, I'm asking for permission to access this energy, but I'm also paying attention. I am letting that aspect of spirit know, here I am. I'm here to get some information. I'm here for the messages. I'm ready to receive them. And I'm saying this prayer to set my intention for that. And that is a very intentional way of accessing that information. But sit down in your journal time and say, I am open to receiving intuitive hits today. I am open to receiving insight and messages from spirit or my angels or however you resonate with that. And then just go about the work of doing your spiritual practice. Write down whatever you would write in your journal, draw a card if you want to. And if any insights or anything comes through, make a note of them. We have to ask. And the last piece that I wanted to say, and I'm looping back to something that I previously mentioned, is stay away from trying to interpret all of it too soon. or giving up because you feel like it's not coming through in a way that you expected. We live in a society that it's pretty hardwired at this point that we want our instant gratification, whether that is fast food or putting something in the microwave, or, I mean, how impatient anymore do we get if we try and get on the internet and it doesn't connect right away? I laugh when I think back to times where we had I don't know, a modem, or there was like a slower dial up and it would actually take a minute. Now like most of us are used to instant connection, and we'll get in a sense of panic if we can't get on. Oh no, what does this mean? And of course, all of that's had an impact on our brain. Our brain is just used to getting things at a quicker rate now. And so we have to be more mindful of patience and developing these mindfulness practices that help us slow down and be more patient. And so often we feel like, well, I did my mystical practice all week. I said I was ready. I was trying to receive a message, and I guess I saw an 1111, but nothing else came through. This must not be real. Right. So it's like you already stopped yourself before you really got going. These things build off of each other unless somebody is uniquely gifted, where they like have a spiritual gift, where they really identify as a mystic and they are having mystic visions. Mystic minded is not the same as that. That is being open to the mysteries and developing a mind for them, developing a way to think about them and to understand them, and to begin to speak that language and understand that language, and to begin to create a way that we can have our own direct experiences, no matter where we're at on the spiritual journey and no matter what our gifts are. So when we're doing that, it's a build. And it's something that unfolds over time. And it's something that we learn through experience, and we learn through directly having knowledge or awareness of something. And over time, often is how we have a bigger insight and say like, wow, I just realized that like, I've had dreams now for months where I had a sense that something was going to happen, and then it did. Gosh, I wonder if my dreams are telling me something. I wonder if that's a gift of mine. Sometimes we don't even know that spirit's been getting through to us because we don't see the bigger pattern. So we have to give it time to grow. We have to give ourselves time to grow into it. I can 100% straight up tell you, I have had some experiences that I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know who to talk to about this. Like, is this real? And as a clinician and as somebody who, is in a clinical field, what I can tell you for reassurance is if you are still oriented to time, person, and place, if you feel like you're able to go about your daily life, if you don't have a history of, some kind of psychosis or delusion or something like that, and some people who have those things might still be having mystical experiences. That's a whole other topic. But if you have had a fairly grounded, normal thing and these things are happening to you, maybe it's okay to say, well, I'm functioning well in all areas of my life. Even though I have these things going on, maybe I can accept that there's some validity to them. So usually I will just do a little reality check for myself and say, well, I'm still here. I still know who I am. I'm still able to show up in other areas of my life and be myself. Sometimes it just takes a while to get used to the idea of something before we are more comfortable saying, I think this is really happening. And a lot of fellow intuitives and spiritual educators and gifted people that I know who are out there in the field doing the work, and I've asked them about their history and their story. It took them a while to get to the point that they're at now. It didn't just start with that. They didn't hear from the angels the first time and put a plaque up on their door that said, I'm an angel communicator. Most people take a while to grow into it and to grow into the idea of it. So we're not doing anything wrong here. We're just being open to the possibility and being good investigators that collect our experiences and stay open to what those experiences might have to teach us and what patterns we might find over time. All right, guys, that is it for today. We are wrapping up. Thank you so much for joining me. And next time we are going to be talking about the Akashic Records. What are they? how can we understand them? And I will be speaking about my experiences working with the records. So until then, be love, be you, be well, and be magic.
You've been listening to Your Heart Magic with Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. Tune in next week for a new episode to support and empower your light.